Gentlemen, I am Colonel Hall, Director of Warning and Threat Assessments, Office of the Assistant Chief of Staff, Intelligence. In this air intelligence presentation, we have traced the development of the Soviet ballistic missile threat to the United States from its inception just after the close of World War II through the period ending 1 January 1960. We do not believe that the Soviet rulers imagine they can achieve decisive military superiority over the United States through the exploitation of a single weapon system such as the ICBM. However, we do believe they hope to exploit its capabilities as an integral part of a mixed offensive force, which together with other offensive and defensive systems will enable them to achieve decisive military superiority over the United States at the earliest practicable date. It is with this thought in mind that we have analyzed the development of the ICBM and the nature and dimensions of the threat it poses during the period 1960 to 1970. Your briefing officer is Lieutenant Colonel Joel Parks of my staff.
Gentlemen, this air intelligence briefing is secret. This presentation will highlight some significant aspects of the development of the Soviet ICBM threat to the United States. To arrive at the firmest possible estimate of Soviet ICBM capabilities, we've analyzed the Soviet guided missile test program in great depth. Specifically, we've analyzed development of missile test ranges and associated research activities at Kapustin Yar, where missiles up to 1,100 nautical miles are fired, and Tyura-Tam, where ICBMs and space vehicles are launched. By 1 January 1960, some 21 ICBMs had been fired from Tyura-Tam, impacting on the Kamchatka Peninsula and on some occasions the Pacific Ocean. But these do not represent all Soviet ICBM research and development testing, since their test program has been conducted continuously and energetically since 1947 at Kapustin Yar. The Ballistic Missile Division of ARDC has helped investigate those firings believed to have been related to ICBM development. The Kapustin Yar test range extends easterly from the Stalingrad area toward Lake Balkhash. The rangehead is some 15 to 25 nautical miles east of the village of Kapustin Yar. Impact zones are at various distances, the furthest being about 1,100 nautical miles. Each zone is heavily instrumented with optical and electronic gear. Prior to the 1955 installation of the FPS-17 long-range radar at Diyarbakir, Turkey, and new ELINT intercept gear to record telemetry, we relied on sources of a lower technical reliability to provide information about the Soviet guided missile program. During 1958, coverage of the long-range radar was extended from 1,000 to 2,000 nautical miles, with several beams added to increase intercept possibilities. Generally, all firings at Kapustin Yar beyond the 600 nautical mile range can be picked up by our long-range radar. Another radar, operational since February 1959, has been constructed on Shimia Island in the Aleutians to detect Soviet ICBM firings. All Soviet ICBM and space shots since then have been detected, except one probable ICBM firing on 9 June 1959, when equipment was inoperative due to maintenance. Total firings at Kapustin Yar until 1 January 1960 are estimated at several hundred. This indicates a continuously progressive R&D program has been energetically carried on by the Soviets for 10 years or more. Evidence indicates that this has provided the Soviets with operational weapons of 200 nautical miles and less, 350, 700, and 1,100 nautical miles. Kapustin Yar has always been the workhorse range for Soviet ballistic missile development. Therefore, it must have been used for component testing and development for the ICBM before activation of the ICBM Space Missile Test Range at Tyura-Tam. Geographic limitations of the Kapustin Yar range limit firings to about 1,200 nautical miles. These facts indicate that the Soviets would be forced to activate an ICBM test range, but its actual existence was not known until early 1957, when the rangehead in the Tyura-Tam area was discovered and the impact zone was generally located in the area of the Kamchatka Peninsula. Good eland coverage of the Tyuratam Range terminal was not effective until late 1957. But we believe the two ICBM firings in or before September 1957, announced by Khrushchev, were probably launched from Tyuratam so as to travel the full 3,500 nautical miles to the Kamchatka area. Judging from Soviet announcements, collateral reports, and computation of satellite orbits, Soviet Sputniks 1, 2, and 3 were launched from Tyuratam. Similar computations indicate that Lunik 1, 2, and 3 were also launched from Tyuratam. It is generally agreed that military missile components were used to launch all space vehicles. We have had good telemetry intercept on every Soviet ICBM and space firing since 30 January 1958, including the launch and re-entry phases of the ICBMs and the launching phase of space vehicles. The recordings indicate that similarly configured boosters are used for all of these firings. 4 apparently successful 3,500 nautical mile ICBM firings were made at Tyuratam in the relatively short time of January to May 1958. Initial component testing must have taken place at Kapustin Yar and other test facilities. Like our own test program, the Soviets must also test various components at lesser ranges before moving into the true ICBM test phase of 3,500 miles or more. Re-entry data and stage separation are tested at both the shorter and the longer ranges. Telemetry intercept on ICBM firings shows considerable development in guidance and re-entry body instrumentation as early as March 1958 and indicates the development program was in a late state even at that time. Therefore, it must have been preceded by a long and intensive test program with numerous flight tests of components. The intelligence community, together with the Ballistic Missile Division of ARDC, re-examined the cumulative data on the Kapustin Yar tests to find out how much of this initial ICBM testing was done with shorter range test vehicles during the past 2 or 3 years. The conclusions were that since mid-1956, the Soviets probably fired over 40 missiles to 700 nautical miles to test ICBM components. Many of the firings of the 1,100 nautical mile missiles since mid-1957 probably had very close ICBM associations. The time correlation between firings of the 1,100 nautical mile missile and the ICBM firings definitely pointed to a close relationship between the two. This, coupled with technical analysis and photography of the Sputniks, has led the Assistant Chief of Staff Intelligence, Air Force, to believe that the Soviets may have had a twin ICBM program, initially with the 700 nautical mile type of missile, and later with the 1,100 nautical mile version. The latter missile is believed to have formed the main booster stages for Sputnik 3 and the Luniks. During 1957, 58, and 59, some 9 vertical firings have been detected by Radiant and Eland. These were undoubtedly for upper air and pathological research. On at least 2 firings, nose cone separation tests were positively identified. Telemetry readout has confirmed Soviet statements that live animals have been ejected during some of these firings. These tests paved the way for the ESV program and included testing of equipment to permit recovery of components from high altitudes. This evidence of considerable R&D on their ICBM ESV program at Kapustin Yar substantiates belief that Soviet ICBM development has been energetically pursued for years and has now reached a highly advanced stage. The Soviet missile development program reveals that it introduces a new dimension to surprise and forces us to reassess our own strategic position and re-evaluate the Soviets' ability to deal a crippling blow. Most vital in this regard are their intercontinental and submarine-launched missiles, since they can be brought to bear directly against the continental United States. Rapid development of ballistic missile and nuclear technology places at the disposal of the Soviet hierarchy a new order of destructive capability. The ICBM nuclear warhead system is beyond anything in our previous experience because the speed with which the enemy can damage us is increasing and chances of detecting his impending moves are decreasing. The attacker who can launch a large-scale surprise attack in a very short time now has a tremendous advantage which could well result in immediate destruction or paralysis of the victim's capacity to resist and prevent him from making a devastating counterattack. It could contribute heavily to the achievement of decisive military superiority. As stated previously, there is no doubt the Soviets had fired at least 21 ICBM test vehicles by 1 January 1960. And from the Sputniks and Luniks, we know they have solved the problems of propulsion and guidance necessary for an effective ICBM weapon system. How well they have solved the re-entry problem is not known, but they have made notable advances in geodesy, cartography, and gravimetry, important requirements in firing missiles. We estimate they can now pinpoint the geographic position of targets in the United States to within 1/4 of a mile or less. Concerning probable Soviet ICBM weapon characteristics, available intelligence does not permit a precise estimate. However, knowledge of the Soviet development program, coupled with U.S. research and development in the ballistic missile field, leads to the conclusion that the first-generation Soviet ICBMs probably have these characteristics: partial or parallel configuration based primarily on telemetry analysis, a speed of Mach 25, necessary for a 5,500-mile ballistic trajectory and in fact observed by radiant intercepts. Guidance of the initial operational ICBMs is likely to be by radar track radio command inertial, with all inertial guidance possible in the near future, and an initial operational capability CEP of 3 nautical miles, improving to 2 nautical miles by 1963. Payload available for the warhead would probably yield about 8 megatons. Improvements of Soviet ICBMs should incorporate appreciable differences in reliability, payload, and accuracy, and almost certainly incorporate a heavy decoy capability. Order of accuracy attributed to the first Soviet ICBMs makes its military effectiveness contingent upon development of a nuclear warhead of high yield and relatively low weight. Early achievement of a warhead weight-yield relationship compatible with the expected missile accuracy is now indicated. Regarding nuclear material, we know that the Soviets have an extensive research and production program. At the present estimated rate of expansion, we believe that by mid-1961, the Soviets are likely to have enough nuclear warheads to meet the requirements of their available weapon systems. It is probable that first-generation Soviet ICBMs will be launched from comparatively simple fixed bases. We believe, however, that the ICBM will have some mobility and will be rail-supported. Fixed installations may include, as a minimum, relatively simple launch pads, checkout and control facilities, and possibly guidance equipment. The Soviets are considered to have the capability to harden their operational ICBM bases. It is estimated, however, that initially all Soviet ICBM bases will be soft. In the period 1962 and after, it is possible that some of the bases will be hardened to withstand overpressures as great as 100 psi. We estimate all Soviet ICBM bases will be inside the USSR. Bases will probably be on or near rail lines. It is likely that they will be located near air bases and major industrial or military installations. Other factors probably influencing the location of missile bases include security, proximity to industrial support, climate, physiography, and booster impact requirements. Distance to target is a primary consideration, but not a limiting factor, due to the probable range of the Soviet ICBM. In general, it appears that the Urals, the area along the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and the region served by the Kotlas-Vorkuta rail line in northwestern USSR are especially well suited for ICBM deployment. However, ICBM launch sites certainly can be located elsewhere in the Soviet Union. The emerging nature of the ICBM threat to the United States is best defined by an overall estimate of Soviet capabilities during the next 10 years. During this period, it is expected that the Soviet aerospace threat will consist of a mixed force of ICBMs and long-range bombers, some armed with air-to-surface missiles. In any such attack, we believe the highest priority would be against SAC bases and any ICBM launching facilities we might have in operation in order to blunt our retaliatory strike capability. This would be followed, if possible, by attacks against our major industrial and political centers. The operational inventory of ICBMs is estimated to be 50 in mid-1960 and 250 in mid-1961. Of these, it is expected that about 22 could reach U.S. target areas in an initial strike in 1960, and about 125 in 1961. The CEPs are estimated to be 3 nautical miles, and the warhead yield could be as high as 8 to 10 megatons. Of the total strategic bomber tanker force of 1,250 aircraft, it is expected that excluding those kills from enemy action, some 500 to 600 bombers should be able to reach U.S. territory. This force would consist mostly of jet medium bombers flying refueled one-way missions. The weapons carried could be nuclear bombs yielding 8 to 12 megatons in 1960 and 10 to 20 megatons in 1961, provided testing is resumed. Bombers could carry air-to-surface missiles having 55 nautical mile range in 1960 and from 55 to 350 nautical miles in 1961. By the 1962-1963 period, the total operational ICBM inventory could be as high as 500 in 1962 and 800 in 1963. Of these, 288 could reach target areas in 1962 and 490 in 1963. The CEPs are expected to improve to at least 2 nautical miles by 1963. The warhead yields could be 10 megatons or higher by 1963, provided testing is resumed. By the 1960 period, the total strategic bomber force is expected to be stabilized at about 1,000 aircraft and have a larger percentage of jet-heavy bombers and tankers and a few supersonic dash bombers. Of this estimated inventory, we expect 400 to 500 aircraft to be able to reach United States territory. Not counting losses due to enemy action, this force should be able to recover about a third of its strike bombers for subsequent missions. The weapons carried would be bombs yielding up to 20 megatons if the Soviets resumed testing, and air-to-surface missiles with ranges of at least 350 nautical miles. The heavy bombers should be able to carry 2 such missiles. It is also expected that by 1963, the Soviets could have operational about 6 nuclear-powered guided missile submarines, capable of launching about 70 ballistic missiles with ranges of 500 to 1,000 nautical miles, with CEPs of 2 to 4 nautical miles. It is much more difficult to define the nature and composition of the Soviet aerospace threat for the 1964 to 1970 period. However, certain developments are expected. The number of strategic bombers is expected to remain at about 1,000. We expect the Bear turboprop bomber to be gradually replaced by a nuclear bomber, beginning in the 1964 period, and a supersonic bomber is expected to replace a large part of the Badger force in the latter half of this period. The air-to-surface missile is expected to improve in accuracy and range, and although there is no evidence of the development of an ASM with ranges in excess of 500 nautical miles, such weapons are estimated to be within Soviet technical capabilities. Flexibility provided by the nuclear bomber and the increased speeds and altitudes of the supersonic bomber, as well as higher yield weapons, should give the Soviets a greatly improved manned air weapons capability. Although there must be some fairly wide parameters in any estimate of Soviet operational ICBM inventories beyond 1963, they have the industrial capability to build an inventory of at least 2,000 ICBMs by the late 1960s. The United States Air Force has consistently maintained that the Soviets are trying to achieve decisive military superiority. The major weapon systems which would affect this capability appear to be nuclear-propelled and supersonic bombers and reliable and accurate ICBMs. Thus, the Air Force believes the Soviets will continually maintain a large mixed force of ICBMs and bombers for the foreseeable future and further improve speeds, CEPs, and reliabilities. Gentlemen, this concludes the air intelligence presentation of the development of the Soviet ballistic missile threat to the United States. May I remind you again that the classification of this briefing is secret.
On the 20th and the 31st of January, 1960, the Soviets successfully launched 2 additional ICBM test vehicles to extended range into the Pacific, a total of 23 successful firings to date. The Soviets claim these firings were part of their space development program, using more powerful multi-stage ballistic rockets. This may be true. However, the evidence of an instrumented nose cone reentry and previously estimated capability of the Soviets with their known hardware leads us to the view that these firings should be looked upon as ICBM shots for determination of accuracy and reentry characteristics at extended ranges. In any case, the demonstrated and announced accuracy of these firings indicates the existence now of a formidable ICBM weapon system.